Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you all? I hope so. You are doing well. Yesterday, what did we discuss? We started discussing from the beginning of element 8. In the element 8, what did we discuss? We started discussing from the general workplace issues, including the health, welfare, and work environment requirements, where we discussed some of the basic requirement of the welfare provision, and in which we have discussed the minimum standards. After that, we moved to the work environment requirements, in which we discussed about space, seating, ventilation, heating, as well as lighting requirements. Then we moved to in the work environment requirements, we also discussed about the lighting requirement, as well as working in extreme hot or extreme cold environment. What are the effects on our body? What are the preventive measures we need to take, or how can we control from the effect of extreme hot or extreme cold environment. Then we moved to our module 2, that was working at height. And working at height, we started discussing about who are the workers at risk, what are the main risks and the accidents which we can have once we are working or while we are working at height. Then we discussed the risk factors for working at height, starting from vertical distance, deterioration of the material, unprotected edge, unstable access equipment, weather, and falling material. We discussed all these one by one in the later slides. As you can see, vertical distance tools and deterioration of the material and all the other factors, we had discussed them. Then we moved to the control of the risk while working at height. So we started discussing from avoiding work at height. Basically, we established a hierarchy of control, in which we said that if we can control it by avoiding the work at height, that would be best, because that would be the elimination. Once you don't work at height, the main fall hazard is eliminated. So that would be the best. So we discussed about avoid working at height, then we discussed preventing fall, then we discussed how we can minimize the distance and consequences. We started discussing all these one by one. So let us have a brief overview about that. When we were doing a discussion about avoiding working at height, we started discussing about the modification of the process, about modification of design. And in case if it is not achievable, what are the factors we have to keep in our mind once or whenever we are going to avoid working at height. These are the factors, like we have to consider the nature and duration of the task, competence of the worker, training needs, planning and supervision, means of access and egress, suitability. All these factors we had discussed. Then we move to prevention of falls and falling materials, where we discussed about how can we prevent our workers from being fall, or how can we prevent the material if the material can get fall. After that, we discussed one very important thing, that is what we call guardrails and toe board. Okay, where we have discussed about the height of the guardrail, what about the mid rail, what about the toe board, what about the working platform. Then we discussed about the suspended platform, like suspended cradle and personal suspended access equipment, for example, the porcelain chair. We have seen all these, as well as the emergency and rescue procedures, or the rescue availability. How can we rescue the person? Like simple rescue could be possible using some kind of ladder. The other one would be mobile elevated working platform, or if we are having a trained rescue team. Once we discuss this, then we move to minimizing the distancing and consequences of fall. That how can we minimize the distance of fall, or how can we minimize the consequence of fall, starting from the fall arrest system, where we discussed about the collective protection like safety nets. Then we have personal protection like full body harness, we discussed about them. After that, we move to the provision of training equipment and instruction. Then we move to the ladder, where we discussed about the ladder safety. After that, we move to the step ladder and we discuss about its safety. Then we move to the trestles and staging board, where we discussed about the main controls of or the main precautions we need to take when we are having trestles and staging board. After that, we discussed about the independent tied scaffold, in which we discussed about the components of the scaffolding, starting from the uh, sole board, base plate, standard ledges, transoms, bracings. We discussed all. Other than this, we also discussed that along with this scaffolding platform, we use the guardrail, in the same guardrail which we had discussed earlier. And over here, we discussed something about the tie. Okay, specifically in this picture, we discussed that how we are going to tie a scaffold, and or where do we have to tie it. And this was the independent tied scaffold. Then we discussed about the mobile tower scaffold. After that, we moved to the mobile elevated working platform. Usually, we call them MUBs. What are their hazards and what are their precautions? We discussed about them. Then we move to the leading edge protection, in case if we are having the leading edge, which is going to be progress and during the construction and cannot be protected, then what are the hazards and controls? We have discussed about all these things, and we move to the main thing, that is housekeeping while working at height closer to the equipment. For example, we discuss the stacking and piling of the material, and how do we have to do that. So this, it was our module 8.2. Now what we are going to discuss, we are going to discuss working in the confined space. Let us first discuss our definition of the confined space. Over here, if we talk about the confined space as per Nibosh, that what is the confined space? It is basically any place, including any chamber, tank, ward, silo, pit, trench, pipe, sewer, flue, well, or other similar spaces. These are basically the examples. Okay, in which, by virtue of its enclosed nature, there arises a reasonable, foreseeable, specified risk. So what will be the definition of confined space over here? Definition, if we read it continually from here, any space, any place in which, by virtue of its enclosed nature, there arises a reasonably foreseeable specified risk. Some of the risks are foreseeable and specified. For example, we can have atmospheric hazard over here. Okay. So all the hazards and risks related to the atmosphere will be having. We may have engulfment. We may have internal configuration hazards. Related to your internal structure. Okay, and then any other serious recognized health and safety hazard. Okay, we may have these four categories. So in case if we are having any of these four categories of the hazard present in a space, okay, and this space would be enclosed as per Nibosh, they are mentioning it should be enclosed space. So we will be considering it a confined space. Okay, now over here, as I mentioned regarding the foreseeable specified risks are fire or explosion, a loss of consciousness from gas, fumes, vapors, lack of oxygen, drowning, asphyxiation, entrapment in free-flowing solid, a loss of consciousness from increased body temperature. So these are some of the hazards. Basically, we can categorize them into these four categories: atmospheric, engulfment, internal configuration, or any other serious health or safety hazard. So these hazards could be there, and these hazards, like for example, fire or explosion could be because of the atmospheric condition, asphyxiation could be because of atmospheric condition, drowning and or engulfment could be there because of the material stored in the confined space or material present in the confined space. In the same way, loss of consciousness from gas, fumes, vapors, atmospheric hazards are there. So basically, we can categorize them into four categories. And moving further, what are the factors we need to assess before we are working in the confined space? We must be considering the general conditions of the confined spaces, in which we will be identifying the previous contents of the confined space. Previously, what was the process in the confined space? What was the material stored in the confined space? What was the input, output? And then we will be discussing about the, or we'll be considering about the residues which are remains of the previous contents. Then we'll be considering the contamination, that in case if we are having a contamination, what kind of contamination we can have. Then we'll be moving to oxygen deficiency or oxygen enrichment. Okay. Then we will be discussing about the we will be considering about the physical dimensions. So basically all these we have to consider. These are the general condition of the confined spaces, and usually we are performing the gas testing. Okay, and almost all the things are covered over there, but related to atmosphere. For the dimension, internal configuration, okay, or like any other specified hazards, we have to go for further assessment. Then what are the hazards arising from the work? For example, if we are going for the chemical cleaning, in case if we might have sources of ignition, like if you are performing some kind of welding, cutting, grinding, or any kind of hard work activity if you are performing. But along with this, if we are going for the chemical cleaning, I should have given you the example of chemical cleaning. For example, if you are cleaning any material with the chemical, the vapors or the fumes from that chemical, if it will be becoming airborne, that once uh, get some kind of hot work or in the presence of hot work, if we are doing that, or if we are having any kind of electronic device or any kind of electrical spark over there, it could cause serious fire or explosion. Then there could be increase in the temperature. If we are having the confined space of metallic walls, these confined spaces usually work as ovens. Outside temperature, if it is 40 degree, inside perhaps it would be 45, 46, 47. Why? Because if we are having confined space, it does not only have dangerous nature because of its enclosed or one entry or limited entry or exit nature. It is not dangerous just because of this reason, but also it would be danger because whenever the temperature would be arising outside of the confined space, inside the confined space, it will start contain the temperature. That basically increase the temperature value inside as compared to the outside. If outside, as I mentioned, it is 40 degrees centigrade, inside perhaps it would be 45 degrees centigrade. So that is why the temperature could be increased inside. Other than this, we may have other activities like hot work that would be increasing the temperature of the confined space as well. So people they get tired early, they are getting dehydrated out there in the confined space. Yes, we are having all these scenarios there in the confined space. Now, if we talk about hazards from outside the space, we can have ingress of substances. For example, if we are having excavation and along with the excavation, we have parked any heavy equipment or generator is started, then carbon monoxide fumes can be gathered over there. Or if we are having any other facility where we are having some kind of toxic gas leaks out, usually these are heavier than air. So in case if these are leaks out, so these would be accumulating over there in the confined spaces. Then what about the emergency rescue? How we can rescue the person inside the confined space immediately? It is not possible because of its limited access or egress. So these are the factors we need to assess before we are going to get inside the confined space. Usually what we are doing, we are preparing the safe system of work for entry in the confined space. Yeah. What do we consider? What are the factors we are considering? First of all, we don't work inside the confined space if it is possible. It means elimination of the hazard. In case if we cannot do that, then we have to carry out a risk assessment properly so that we can identify all the hazards and their controls. We will also be developing a safe system of work to perform the job inside the confined space. Then we will be developing the emergency arrangement if we will be having one man down, how we are going to rescue the person, who will be rescued, how he will be rescued. Then use permit to work course, this is very important. Usually we are getting the entry permit to work in the confined space. Then we must be having trained and competent person to work in the confined spaces. Next, what comes in the safe system of work, we are considering the supervision, the competency of the worker, how we are going to communicate with the people who are working in the confined space. We will be going for the atmospheric testing for monitoring. That is for that purpose. Usually, we are having authorized gas testers. Those jobs are just to identify if, or in case, if there is some kind of gases are present or not. Then we will be going for the ventilation. Mechanical ventilation is of course required. Removal of the residues, remains are there. For example, during the process of any kind of oil and gas, of course, fumes would be there. Of course, some remaining uh, particles or some remaining liquid would be there. We need to remove that. And then for any kind of function unit, for example, in which we are having some kind of machine in, and the machine is taking some kind of input and giving some kind of output, we must be locking it out, tagging it out, we must be de-energizing it so that we can perform our job safely inside the confined space, inside that machine. Isolation, lock off of electrical, mechanical hazards. Okay, so whatever the machines are being running, of course, we are having some kind of driving force which are running the internal process. We also need to lock them out, tag them out. Then we will be going for the PPE selection, that what proper PPE is required to work in the confined space. What about the access and egress? We need to make sure that access and egress is safe. How we can prevent the fire? Do we need to have a fire watch specifically, or dedicated fire watch is required? Lighting issues must be solved because we should be having clear vision inside the confined space. What about the suitability of the individual? They are suitable, they are capable to do the job. That is why they come in the competency. And then we'll be discussing the emergency rescue procedures. What are the emergency or rescue? What are the emergency procedure, or what are the rescue procedures in case if we are having any kind of emergency in the confined space? So in this way, we are preparing the safe system of work for the confined space entry. By the way, if your client is asking you to prepare the confined space entry plan, you can include all these points in your entry plan. Keeping all these points in your mind, you can prepare your plan, and that would be a perfect plan to get enter in the confined space or to perform your jobs in the confined spaces. So this was our module 3, in which we discussed about how we are working in the confined space. Okay, and where we discussed about the definition of confined space, the 4 main categories as I explained you. Then we discussed individual hazards of the confined space. And after that, we discussed what are the factors which are to be assessed before we are going to work in the confined space. Some of them are general condition, work activity hazards, and then hazards from outside the confined space. After that, we move to the safe system of work. In case if we have to work as per the safe system of work, what can we do? What should be included in the safe system of work? So it was our module 8.3. Now we are going to discuss our next module, that is lawn working. Lawn working is always an issue. How? Because if someone is working alone, okay, he would be separated from his colleagues. Perhaps as you can see over here. What about the next colleague, where he is? How far the other person is? It seems that the person is doing very easy job because he just have to stay over there. He just have to keep monitoring. Sometimes companies, they are providing the rest shelters over there. The person would be keep sitting over there, and he would be just watching the uh, area, or watching the for example function of the machine. But what if something go wrong with this guy? What about the emergency? Maybe some kind of terrorist attack. Who will be informing the other people? How he would be rescued? In case if he's having some kind of medical emergency, how he will be rescued? In case, let's say, a very common thing in his family, If there is some emergency and he has to go over there, what about him? Who is going to relieve him? Okay, so these are the person we are usually having when someone is working alone. Okay, and over here we may be having things gone wrong in case if we don't have any kind of proper assistance. So what we have to do, we we must make sure that these guys should be in our communication in our uh, under our supervision, because they are having difficulty in communication with their colleagues in case if the colleague is out of eyesight, or in case if the other colleague is not able to hear him. For example, in this picture, as you can see, what about the other guy? Where is he? Can he see him? Can he see the other guy? Or can he shout to call him for help? Okay, of course, it would be hard. So in emergency cases, it's really very hard to manage the lawn working. But there are some kind of protocols, or there is what we call it safe system of work for lawn working. We are having it, yes. How do we manage that? Let us start discussing it. Number one, no lawn working for high risk activities. For example, usually we don't have it. We all the time follow the buddy system that minimum or at least two persons will go inside the confined space together. Then we should be having remote supervision in which we can, or we should be taking continuous feedback from our colleagues that they are okay, and we should be staying in communication with them. And logging the worker's location, we should be having a proper register where we are having the worker's location, where is he, uh, did he come on the job in the morning time, yes or no, how he is going to get job over there, who is going to pick him up over there. The next is mobile phones or radios should have been provided so that they can communicate. All worker alarm system should be there so that some kind of this band should be there so that in case if we are having man down, automatically we should be notified that uh, the person is down or he is having some kind of health issues. Then the procedures for lawn workers should be defined properly. Some kind of rotation job should be there. Then emergency procedure should be defined, and people who are working on they should be trained properly for self-rescue techniques in case it's required for them. So this is basically our next module that was about the non-working. It was simple, but yes, it needs some attention. So if you are having non-working people inside your organization, for example, security guards, remember, we must provide them at least one buddy for them so that in case of an emergency, they should be rescued, for example, in case of medical emergency. Our next topic is slip and trips. What are slips? What are trips? We will be discussing about them. And over here, there is an exercise. That exercise says what is the difference between a slip hazard and a trip hazard. Okay, a slip is basically once you are working on some kind of low friction floor. Okay, and you get slip. For example, you can have slippery floor from ice. Okay, and you can have powder, granules, mud. Okay, oil we are having over there on the floor. So we can have these kind of issues where we can get slip. So this is slip. And what about the trip? Trip is, let's say you are moving somewhere, okay, and you got some object on the walking or working surface. Let's say this is an object. So once the person will be moving over there, he can get slip and he can get fall from here. Sometimes we are having some kind of uh, you can say holes in the floor, okay, or some openings in the floor. Sometimes we are having some kind of wiring there. So over because of these kind of obstacles or objects on the walking or working surfaces, people they get grip and they can fall. Usually, we are having big issue with the slip, trip, and fall because 15% of all workplace accidents are because of slip, trip, and fall. They are people they are working, they get fall. Okay, while walking on working or walking surfaces. Now, what are the common slipping and tripping hazards? If we talk about the slip hazard, smooth floor surfaces inherently slippery. For example, you are installing a marble, if they are getting wet, then some kind of contamination is there. For example, frost and ice is there. Then we are having slippery surfaces in case if we are having oil over there. Okay, that can also be considered as contamination. While you are washing the floor or you are mopping the floor at that time, it can stay wet. That could cause slip hazard. Okay. After that, if you move to trip, sometimes we are having uneven or loose floor surfaces, trailing cables, objects on the floor, sudden changes in the level of the floor. Then the people they get trip and they get fall. Question is how we can control these slip or trip hazards. Very simple. Control measure says that first of all we have to go for some kind of management principle. What is that? Eliminate the hazards. If there is something which is placed over there, okay, on the floor, eliminate that. Then second one is create a safe place, create a safe person. How do we do that? Create a safe place. Well, provide proper housekeeping. The area should be well ventilated. Okay. In case if we are having some kind of you can say uh, temporary wet area, we can put some kind of we can put some kind of signboard over there that it is the floor is going to be slippery because we are going to clean it. So these kind of in this way we can make the area, we can create a safe place by identifying it properly and informing the people. Next is creating a safe person by properly training him, providing proper training instructions. Okay, so that the person should know that if we are having slip or trip hazards on the job site. Excuse me, guys. Okay, next is about the risk assessment. What first we discussed about the management principle. Now we are going to discuss about the risk assessment consideration. First of all, normal pattern of movement should be defined properly so that people should be following them. Okay, and then we should be having abnormal or predictable movements. That in case if the person is coming from here, in case if he is getting late, he can run. Okay, or he would be walking how he can fall down. We have to identify the abnormal movements. Then we will be moving to the accident history. What kind of accidents were already occurred over here? Also, we need to consider the adverse weather conditions. For example, once we are having, in case if we have a rainfall and the area would be wet and or the situation would be muddy, then slip hazards could be there. After that, we should be having maintenance requirement. For example, if the floor is having some kind of hole or there is some kind of floor opening, okay, then we must be repairing it. Okay, maintenance is all the time required for these kind of floor conditions. Now, next is regarding the creation of the safe place. What can we do? We can have some additional steps. We can create some kind of slip resistant surface, but that would be depending upon the number of the people, okay, footwear they are using, wear and tear of the surface, chill and contamination on the floor, environmental condition or weather condition. Okay, so from our side, this is what can we do. But in case if there is some kind of wear and tear or too many people are passing from that area, so of course even if you are having slip resistant surface, when people would be using too much, these surface will become smooth, right? Footwear they are using, those footwear should be slip resistant, and then wear and tear of the floor, spill and contamination, whatever the surface you are making, in case if there is some kind of oil on the floor, then of course that would not be slip resistant anymore. What about the environmental condition? If we are having dust and rain falls up over there, so that would be more slippery as compared to the normal situation. After that, what can we do? We can go for the spillage control and drainage should be properly over there. For that purpose, we can go for the inspection and then based on the inspection, we can go for the maintenance. Okay, or either we are maintaining it and inspecting it, maintaining it and keep inspecting it. That our floors are okay and keep inspecting them just to make sure that floors are okay. Next is contaminant of the foreseeable spill and leak. For example, one food container, if there is some kind of contaminant falls down, so you must be creating some kind of bund around it. Okay, and that would be containing it up to one place, and that is not going to let the spill move out of this wall. Then the next is behavioral control, banning the drinks. Usually in the induction training, you guys would have told that you are not allowed to have drinks on the side. The reason is if you will be having drink on the side, of course, we can have spill on the ground and people they can get slip over there. Okay. And drainage for outdoor walkways if we are having so that in case if we are having rainfall, okay, so we should be having proper drainage so that water should not be getting accumulated over there and the areas should be remaining slip resistance. Then wet floors, for example, uh, if we are having some kind of showers over there, okay, the showers still should not be getting out in, for example, in our welfare facilities. So those should be slip resistant. Next is regarding the spillage control, the same thing. It is essential in many workplaces. Of course, we need to have it. It should be ensuring that pedestrians stay within the designated areas and pedestrian areas are free of hazard. We are making the workplace safe by providing proper knowledge, proper signages over there, barricading the area so that the one who has to walk, he would be walking only on the designated area. And it should be designated by some kind of guardrail, curbs, pavements, marking. Yes, this is what we have discussed that area should be designated either by any kind of barricade. It should be properly designated so that people should be able to follow that. One more important thing, this area which you are making for pedestrians, it should not be having any kind of man-machine interface. Or in case if it is having man-machine interface, then we should be considering some other kind of control measures, like if we are having the flagman with the machine or not. Otherwise, this area should be free from all the other expected hazards. Like for example, some kind of drop objects or some kind of if it is at the edge of excavation. Next, use of signs and personal protective equipment. We can use some kind of sign like prohibition signs would be there that if you cannot go there, or if you can go, or if you cannot go over there. Warning signs should be there. Mandatory signs should be there. For example, we should be having this kind of footwear over here, or slip-resistant footwear is required only. Then that is basically mentioned over here. PPE in the form of safety footwear with appropriate tread pattern and grip characteristics. So we must be having proper footwear because if we talk about slip or trip, our feet are the main part of our body which stay in contact with the floor. And slip or trip hazards are basically arising from the floor. So over here, the PPE that would be recommended is basically about proper footwear. Next is we have to give information, instruction, training, and supervision regarding the hazard, what is required for them, how they can apply it regarding the PPE. Supervision is essential, and we must make sure that people should be having safe behavior, because if the people they don't have the safe behavior, then it would not be possible to control the hazard. Because as we discussed earlier, that unsafe behavior leads 97% of the accidents. So that is why we must be focused on the safe behavior or correct behavior. Next, from our side, we can also go for the housekeeping and maintenance of the safe working place. Floors and walkways must be cleaned. Spill procedures must be defined. Spill kits should be there. So immediately, in case if we are having any kind of spill on the ground, for example, if oil falls on the ground, okay. So immediately it should have been contained and should be cleaned immediately, okay. And in case if it would be cleaned, then only we can say yes, okay, the area is safe now. This is what we can do from our side. Housekeeping standards should be defined. Okay, proper techniques should be defined. Floors, walkways, guardrails, and fencing, access and egress must be inspected and repaired in case if there is some repairing is required. Emergency exits, emergency exits all the time must be kept clear, free from any obstruction, well ventilated, well lighted. Usually, we don't have well ventilated for the emergency exit because you don't have to stay over there for longer time. But here we should be having. And lighting must be checked and maintained all the time. So this was our module 8.5, and that was about the slip and trip hazard. Just to give you the continuity from the slip and trip hazard. Uh, in this module, what did we discuss? We discussed about the slip hazard, that what is a slip hazard, what is a trip hazard, how we can manage about the slip or trip hazard, what are the risk assessment consideration we need to have. Then regarding the slip resistant surfaces, how we can create the slip resistant surfaces in case if we are having the spillage on the ground. From the spillage, how we can control the spillage, how we can control the drainage. And this is the continuity, spillage control. Okay, and regarding the people, so that in case if we are having spillage over there, people should be getting away from those spill areas. Okay, for that purpose, we discussed that we should be having a separate area for the pedestrian walkways. And sorry, we should be having separate area for the pedestrian. And next is the use of sign and personal protective equipment, like we can have some kind of prohibition signboard, warning signboard, mandatory signboard for the footwear. After that, we move to the information, training, instruction, and supervision for all the workers who are going to work in that area. And then finally, we discussed about the housekeeping requirement and the maintenance requirement for all kind of walking and working surfaces. So it was our module 8.5, and we will be discussing our module 8.6 in our next lecture. So let's have a break now, and after the break, we will be discussing about the module 8.6, which is about safe movement of people and vehicle in the workplace. And let's have a break, and after the break, we'll be joining and we'll be having this lecture. Thank you so much.